夠時間，亦都
Members, we have formed a quorum. I call the meeting to order now. Welcome to this meeting of the Panel on Constitutional Affairs. Item number 1 on the agenda, information paper issued since the last meeting. The relevant paper has been uploaded to our website. It's a letter from Honorable Dennis KWOK, dated the 31st of January 2019. He wants to have an early opportunity to discuss a private member's bill sponsored by him. I would like to put this on our agenda as soon as practicable. And I have also informed government officials about my intentions, and we hope that the paper can be prepared and submitted to us as soon as possible so that we can have a discussion. Mr. KWOK, thank you. I welcome the development, but I've been waiting for 2 years in respect of this private member's bills on the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance. It's been 2 years already, so I hope this can be put on the agenda expeditiously. Can you give an indication as to when this can be done? Mr. KWOK, when I received your letter, it was the first time I knew about your intention to do this. I know that in the last term you communicated with Mr. Martin Liu on the same matter. I did not know whether anything had happened after your letter was received. As soon as I have become the chairman of this panel, I have informed the government that I would like to have this item put on the agenda for discussion as soon as possible. Then I've also asked the government to submit a paper as soon as possible. Ms. Claudia Mao. Well, I hope this is not a question about you, and you should not be just swayed by the reply saying that things will be done as soon as possible. As Mr. Dennis KWOK has said, he has been waiting for 2 years. According to a recent report, Beijing knew this, and Beijing was totally in opposition to this. So I hope you should not convey an impression that you don't want to have any discussion. It seems that it would be difficult to have this done before the summer break. But can you promise us at least that this can be done before the end of 2019? Ms. Mo, I think you know that we have a long list of outstanding items carried forward from past terms, and the same has happened to many panels. All I can say is that since I became the chairman, I have been dealing with this as soon as I can. But can I promise a deadline? Well, it's not something that is within my control alone. Of course, I can make an arrangement for a discussion if I don't need any paper from the government. Of course, that's not really the case. I know that there are many outstanding items for discussion in different panels, but we need to prioritize in terms of urgency. Please pursue the government because we're talking about a very important matter here. Mr. Yip Kin Yin. Chairman, we all think that this is important. And during her electioneering campaign, the CE promised that this will be done. So I agree. I certainly subscribe to the view that this should be done quickly. If the government can give you an indication very quickly that they can send an official to attend the meeting or to submit a paper very quickly, then it's fine. But if the government doesn't respond very quickly, can we have a discussion with our government officials? Well, I stand to be corrected by the Secretariat. My understanding is that in the past, some panels did not extend an invitation to government officials, and times was given to the sponsoring member for the private member's bill to give an introduction, and then members could then raise questions to that member. That would be taken as a kind of briefing in respect of the private member's bill. Mr. KWOK, you want to say something? I'm more than willing to introduce my private member's bill. We have asked the government the same question for 7 years. There's no question that have no knowledge or they don't know what to do. If they cannot do this in 7 years, I don't want to wait anymore. Because without discussion here in this panel, I cannot table the bill. So please ask them if they want to send anyone along to our meeting or not. If they say no, I'm more than happy to do it without them. All right, I'll ask them for response, whether they are going to send someone or for whatever reasons they don't want to send anyone. I would let you know as soon as I receive the reply from the government. Mr. Lam Chok Ting. Well, the government has dragged its feet for years. They should at least tell us the time limit that they have in mind when discussion is going to take place. Otherwise, we should agree to the approach suggested by Mr. Dennis KWOK. All right, so that's all for this item. Next item on the agenda, items for discussion at the next meeting. Please refer to the list of outstanding items for discussion. At this point, would the Secretariat please invite the officials to join us? In the next, I think I have to inform members that the next regular meeting will be held on the 18th of March, Monday at 2:30 p.m. There are two items proposed for the next meeting. First, welcome, Secretary. The general publicity plan for the general elections of District Councils 2019. Second, a briefing by the Privacy Commissioner on the work of his office. And now we move on to the next item. It's launching a pilot scheme of advance polling in the 2020 LegCo general elections. For this item, we have the Secretary, and his team, including Mr. Patrick Nip, Mr. Rosanna Law, Ms. Alfie Chan, Mr. Wong Seaman, and Mr. Raymond Wang. I think our time is rather tight today, so I would like to make some planning on time management. I don't want to overrun too much. 14 members here, right? "15 members would like to speak. You will be given 4 minutes each to speak and to get a reply. So without further ado, let's have the first one, Ms. Tanya Chan. Ms. Tanya Chan, Mr. Alvin Young, Mr. Ao Lok Hin, Mr. Claudia Mo, Dr. Helena Wong, Mr. Jiming, Mr. Chen Chi Chin, Mrs. Regina Yip, Mr. Yip Kin Yip, Dr. Vasila Leung, Dr. Jiang Chung Tai, Ms. Alex Mack, Mr. Luk Chung Hong, Deputy Chairman, Mr. Ma Fung Kwok, and Mr. Stephen Ho. I forgot to give the floor to the government for introduction before I give the floor to Ms. Tanya Chan for her questions. Thank you. Actually, for this meeting, we have two items. One is the launching of a pilot scheme on advanced polling in the LegCo general election, and the second one is a pilot scheme of electronic counting for the 2020 LegCo general election. These are two new proposed schemes for the coming LegCo election. After a general election, the EAC and the government would conduct a review to see what improvements can be made. And we also listen to views from different quarters, including views from members, so that we might streamline the relevant procedures or to take into account technological developments and make some more convenient arrangements for elections. But whatever we do, the starting point must be that the election must be conducted fairly and openly, and for this pilot scheme that we're talking about now is the result of this particular context. In the report on the 2018 by-election, the EAC makes the suggestions that we should make some arrangements to facilitate the voting by polling staff, for example, advanced polling. And therefore, we have published in 2017 a consultation paper on review of electoral arrangements. We received some views from political parties and electoral members that for civil servants who serve as polling staff who are on duty on the polling day, can something be done to facilitate their voting? We have make a serious consideration of the views and suggestions received, and whatever we propose, we are mindful that we must make sure that the elections are fair and open. If some voters, for various reasons, cannot vote on the polling day, should we also make some arrangements to facilitate these people in casting their votes? And so that's the idea behind the advanced polling scheme. But whatever proposals that we need to take on board, we have to be very cautious. We would start with a pilot scheme in a limited scope where risk will be limited and controllable, and then we can learn from the experience and make further improvements, or to expand the scope of the scheme gradually. As we have set out in the paper, in 2020, in the electrical general election, we have some ideas about a pilot scheme of advanced polling, and through this meeting, we'd like to consult members on their views in regard to the arrangement details. Having considered the EAC's recommendations and having considered the relevant matters, we would like to launch a scheme in 2020 electrical general elections to conduct a pilot scheme for the polling staff, for civil servants and non-civil servants, contract staff who are required to be on duty on the polling day. And the arrangement will be such that they will be facilitated to cast a vote in advance. It's estimated that around 30,000 people will be eligible for this scheme, approximately 21,000 polling staff and 9,000 other government employees from various bureaus and departments. If this is going to be done, and in order to make sure that the EAC, the REA, will be able to work out the necessary arrangements, and also to provide experience for future polling exercises, we would like to set the date of advanced polling to be 7 days in advance, because the number of voters will be much fewer than the turnout, actual voter turnout on polling day. We would like to set up 1 or 2 polling stations with limited polling hours, such as 9 to 4, to facilitate the arrangement.
As for election-related materials and counting arrangements, in order to ensure fairness, so that from the advanced polling until the main polling day, there will be security measures for ballot boxes, papers, and registers, and agents can also be present to ensure security. And for the necessary security measures, for safeguarding the electoral materials. To increase transparency, then we will have the votes will be mixed together and counted in the CCS on the day after the polling. So we will not also allow exit poll for these advanced polling. Due to the limited number, it is not allowed to disclose the voting preference for a single category of electors. So the appointment of agents will follow the following manner: one election agent and also the other agents. So subject to members' views, this will require legislative amendments to the into the LegCo, and we hope that that will be the legislation procedure will be completed by the end of 2019, so that this pilot scheme can be implemented in 2020. Since we are now rather short of time, I'm afraid that we have to limit your speaking and answering time within 3 minutes. Ms. Tanya Chen, for the civil service as well as the contractors, non-civil service contractors that are engaged in polling stations, well, have you ever considered having shifts of these staffing? We know that the civil service servants engaged is rather big, but you have 9 to 4 polling hours with 1 or 2 stations at each of the 18 districts. And you will have security measures, and you will invite the Hong Kong police force for assistance. For us, well, even if it's the hours advanced by 7 hours, we have doubts. So we are worried that whether these ballot papers will be lost or whether it will be tampered with. So first of all, for this pilot scheme, our basis is not really targeted on only civil service or contractors. We are now starting with this single group, and to be extended to other groups if necessary. Now, 2 shifts, you will need more personnel. In fact, the REO, for instance, in the LegCo general election, they have to appoint over 20,000 civil servants to run these polling stations, which is equivalent to 1/8 of the total number of civil servants. If you need 2 shifts, I'm afraid that it is rather difficult to recruit as many. Of course, security measures is of paramount importance. So we have to ensure that the ballot papers and the materials would be secure between the advanced polling day and the main polling day. So we will have dedicated areas with sealed facilities. And if you need agents to be there, well, can your agents be present for 7 days? Well, you can use technology to do that. Of course, we all understand that security measures are of great importance. Mr. Alvin Young, so in order to ensure that the polling staff would have enough time for voting, it is important, but security is also very important. Polling is is a very delicate matter. So in the election of the CE, 2 computers were lost at that last time. So we don't really have full confidence in that these materials and ballots would not be lost during 7 days between the advanced polling and the main polling day. And then I'll follow up with Mrs. Tanya Chan's question. The secretary saying that for 2 shifts you need to increase the civil servants engaged from 1/8 to 2/8. Well, for one main polling day, you need a lot of money and time. Now, if we are to increase the number of personnel involved so that the civil servants can have adequate time to vote on that day, would the increase be justified? Now, our target, our purpose of this exercise is not only solving the problem of the voting arrangements for polling staff on the main polling day. Our purpose is that if for other groups, if they cannot vote on the main polling day, would there be other arrangements to facilitate their voting? This is but only a pilot scheme. These civil servants are engaged in the polling station work. So this is the first group that we are doing this exercise, pilot exercise with. So it is not a matter whether we can engage, we can solve this problem of polling staff only, because this is only the first group that we have in mind. As for personnel, 1/8 of the civil service will be engaged, up to over 20,000. Well, for recruitment of polling staff, we need to exercise a lot of efforts for this recruitment. Thirdly, for the security, it is indeed an important matter that we are focused on. We know that for anything, we cannot ensure 100% security, but we know that it is so important that we need to have a lot of preparations in order to have the risks under control. I'd like to ask the Secretary, what you mean that the extended on a larger scale of advanced polling? What have you in mind? Of course, you start with the civil servants. If they can enjoy advanced polling, then all voters, if it's reasonable, they should enjoy the same. So what are the potential problems involved? In general polling, if you allow some community group to vote in advance, that could be unfairness, because every group has a preference. If you give this privilege to one and not to the other, that will be a difference. Well, you are saying that it is pilot scheme. For this pilot scheme, about 30,000 would be involved. So if you take it into half, 15,000, then we cannot say that there's no marked impact on the results. Well, if you limit it to a smaller group, then of course you are now only a pilot system, a pilot scheme. Well, I think for a smaller group, which would have no impact on the results of the polling, such a pilot scheme would be more convincing. We are now doubtful Well, there are intervening 7 days. And would you be able to ensure the full security, of the ballot papers and the materials? So would it be possible to have a smaller group with a smaller number of ballot papers that are easily more manageable? Well, for the advanced polling arrangements, we are thinking that some voters who may not be able to vote on the main polling day, for instance, they have different reasons of being absent from Hong Kong, and if you allow them to vote a week ahead, they may be able to vote. And there are other reasons for being unable to vote on the main day. So if you have some arrangements for advanced polling, we would be able to allow more voters to vote, and that is our aim. Whereas different arrangements would have different impact on the results. This is not what we have matter that we'll have in mind. What we have in mind is to allow more voters to vote, and that is why we have this advanced polling scheme. So we will have the civil servants as the first group, as a pilot scheme to gain experience. As for security measures, we feel that this is something that we are all very much focused on. Well, there are arrangements to be made. We can listen to your suggestions as to the security measures in these 7 days. I don't think that this is not manageable. Mr. Claudio, 7 days is 1 week. English says that a week is a long time in politics. So 7 days, and you had a case of a lost computer. So what would happen if the whole ballot box is lost? Well, can you have different shifts? For instance, you can have a lunch break, and the other one can have others could have a dinner break for voting, and you can recruit somebody to take their stand in their stead. Well, voter is a choice whether to vote or not. The priority that one gives to voting. You can use technology. You can have CCTV camera focused on the ballot boxes, but technology can be tampered with. So the bottom line is the lack of confidence or trust. Well, you are saying 7 days. Do you have an example of 7 days? I am going to oppose you in this pilot scheme. Well, thank you, Mrs. Mo, for your opinion. Of course, advanced polling means days before the main polling day. Can you have a day before? I think the day or a Sunday. Well, if you have a Sunday, if we have voting on Sunday, we have to set up things on a Saturday. No, I am saying that they have to have meal breaks where they can vote, meal break time. Well, we are doing utmost to facilitate polling staff to vote before or during meal breaks. However, it is difficult for them because there may be a distance between the one they are manning and the one they are voting.
So some of the polling staff could not do this. There's also advanced polling arrangement in other countries. For example, in Australia, the advanced polling is more than 2 weeks in advance. Canada is 9 or 10 days in advance. I think we can put in place certain arrangements. Well, in Australia, you will be fined 50 Australian dollars if you do not vote. But we don't have a fine in Hong Kong. But that's a different matter. But we want to make it convenient to provide, make it convenient by providing the arrangements for electors. Dr. Helena Wong. The Democratic Party certainly subscribes to the view that this is the right of every elector, and including civil servants. If they want to vote, they should be allowed to vote. But I don't know whether whether your objective is just like this. Or are you going to allow every elector to vote in advance, to take advantage of the advance polling arrangement for whatever reasons? You have talked about the by-election report in one of the paragraphs, 7.15, 4.15. The government is asked to look into arrangements, possible arrangements to facilitate the voting by polling staff. So the EAC is talking about civil servants or NCSC's polling staff. But now you want to take on board these recommendations and try to extend it to everyone. So the Democratic Party objects to this proposed approach. This is not the recommendation of the EAC. The EAC has made a precise recommendation to make it convenient for polling staff. The government can certainly do this administratively so that all civil servants carrying out polling duties can vote, such as asking them to vote in the different time periods in batches, or to have a different ballot paper box for them in different polling stations. You have now twisted the EAC's recommendations, and as a result, after the pilot scheme is launched, you allowed everyone to take advantage of the advanced polling arrangement. The Democratic Party is against this idea because we are talking about 7 days. Well, you know, the police may be asked to keep a watch on the ballot papers, but they have been known to have lost some court evidence, and the electioneering campaign and atmosphere can change a lot in 7 days. And also there will be a separate polling date, and all political parties and candidates would find it very hard to cope, especially smaller parties and individual candidates without political backing from political parties. How many civil servants have been found not be able to vote in past elections? Well, first of all, we don't have any statistics on the number of civil servants who could not vote. The EAC has made a recommendation for polling staff, but we have received suggestions and views from other parties, including political parties, on whether we could do the same for other people. So that's why we want to launch a pilot scheme for polling staff, civil servants only. But this is not the ultimate objective. After the pilot scheme, we'll try to review and learn from the experience, and then we'll see what can be done for other groups. We have a look into possible alternative administrative means. Whatever can be done will be done, but there are actual and real difficulties. All right, those who want to speak, please press the button, or I'll draw a line here. Mr. Chen Chi-chin, we're talking about new polling arrangements, whether advanced polling or the one in the next item, electronic counting, or as many pro-establishment camp members have been talking about, that is advanced polling, general advanced polling. It's a question of confidence. Are we confident that the government can manage it? I don't want to talk about conspiracy or possible ulterior hidden agenda. We have to weigh the benefit against the risk. Well, when we had a small circle election involving 1,200 electors, and yet your polling staff managed to have 2 computers lost, and we don't know what has happened to them now. You cannot say that we want to make it convenient, so it's 1 or 2 weeks in advance. It's a question of fairness. What is the polling period? It's the entire period before polling. And we're talking about a very tight schedule. Some of the forums are not yet conducted 7 days in advance. And it's like the stock market. Your popularity ratings can rise and fall in a short time. In one of the elections, I was 1% behind at the last survey. As I've said, 7 days can mean a lot of change. You can be number 1 in the list and number 7 in the list at the end of the 7-day period. I understand the concerns about people's confidence and risk, but we have to be fair to our colleagues. In the, as I've said, after the election cycle is over, we would conduct a review and we would propose some recommended arrangements to improve the polling arrangements so that as far as possible electors can take part in voting. But we are also mindful of the resources that candidates have to expend in their campaigns. So we have to make sure that the risks are manageable and is at a level acceptable. But we can only know if this should be further expanded if we, after launching a pilot scheme and we have conducted a review. Would you say that this is not fair to those who are new to this political scene? Well, I will say that 7 days is the right amount of time for such an arrangement. The speaker's not coming through. Please switch on the mic from Mrs. Regina Yim. I welcome this arrangement for advanced polling. There are a lot of similar arrangements in other jurisdictions. It's good to allow more people to participate in democratic elections. There may be implementation issues to tackle, such as security, but such difficulties can be overcome. And as the Secretary has suggested, let's give it a try. And I have talked about this before. That is overseas or outside Hong Kong polling. Let's try it on certain mainland cities first, as there are people saying that they were concerned about smuggled ballot papers, and then gradually we can extend it to other cities, San Francisco, Vancouver, where we have a lot of Hong Kong residents living there. Let's do it one step at a time. Secretary, as the member has said, we need to take the first step in the form of a pilot scheme before we can learn from the experience. As for overseas polling arrangements, or for registered electors to vote in a polling station set up in the mainland and similar arrangements. I think this is really a question of confidence, a question of security, as suggested by some members. Having considered the views received in the last review, we propose that for the next legislative general election next year, we'll do this as a pilot scheme, and then in due course we are going to talk about the advanced polling, also a pilot scheme in this context. We will seriously explore the other suggestions from members in due course. Well, you know that even for caucus election in the U.S., in the different states, they also allowed electors to cast vote in advance. And I've received complaints from civil servants. Some are living on outlying islands or the northern districts, and if they are asked to carry out polling duties on Hong Kong Island, it's just not possible for them to go back to their constituencies to vote. So I hope you can do more to help and facilitate. Mr. Yip Kin Yin, in principle, this proposal is an improvement over the present polling arrangements, and we should in principle welcome all improvements. But we need to look at the technical feasibilities. If this can be handled technically, of course, why not? But in previous exchanges with government officials, and as indicated in the paper, there are concerns and worries that I would like to share with other members. Some members have raised security issues. I won't talk about those again, but as a matter of actual implementation, you need to have the same group of polling staff or another group of polling staff to man the polling stations for that advanced polling arrangements. And these are the same group of civil servants to the same group of polling staff work on the advanced polling day as well as the actual polling day. So what about their chance to vote? The same problem will arise. At present, when an elector enters a polling station, you need to have some polling staff crossing out the name on the register, so you have a document registering all electors who have voted. But for the advanced polling, you are not going to have as many polling stations. Are you going to different polling registers, or you have a big polling register? So how can you transfer the records in advance polling to the actual polling day, so that you know who have voted in advance polling, because you rely on manual crossing out by pen on the register. So it is a kind of family cottage industrial practice. We are concerned that there will be there were difficulties and actual problems on the polling day.
If such technical problems can be resolved, how it can be done, then it would be better for us to consider whether the pilot scheme can be launched. Time is up. So a very simple reply from the Secretary. You mentioned a technical problem. We need lesser personnel staffing for advanced polling. So even if we need to have manual marked copies, that can be done. Well, on a long-term basis, we could have electronic means. Well, for this pilot scheme, we are not really, not only the polling day, advanced polling day, we need to also garner experience from the various steps involved. Well, it is not a matter for waiting for electronic means before we can start this pilot scheme, even if now we are doing it manually. Priscilla Leung. If such a pilot scheme succeeds and allows the polling staff to vote, this is something that I would support. As for implementation, there are several things that you need to pay attention to. First of all, publicity. Well, would there be a confusion involved when those who are not eligible for voting, or for advanced voting, they come to vote? And whether if you miss advanced polling, even if you are eligible, can you vote on the main polling day? You have to, there are 3 million data from 2 computers that are now lost, so you have to solve this to increase confidence. Secondly, it is the understanding of the people. If this pilot scheme is successful, you would enlarge the extent for advanced polling. I'm afraid you have to be very cautious. Any expansion must base on the fact that you want, through this advanced polling scheme, to have 2 days polling in the future. If you use the penal institutions and the police stations, it is very clear because these are dedicated polling stations. Well, in this pilot scheme, the volume of the number of voters involved are not too much. But however, for the expansion, would it be really involving a large number of electors? So you have to be very careful, so there won't be any confusions for the polling days or for the numbers involved. For instance, in the span of 7 days, there are lots of changes because politically speaking, there could be a lot of happenings in the intervening days. So I think that the number of people involved in advanced polling should be controlled to the minimum and not involving too many people. Less confusion would happen. Well, Secretary, in this pilot scheme, those who are eligible are civil servants involved in polling. So he has a main polling station for the civil servant. Well, if the civil servant eligible has not voted in advanced polling, he has to go back to the main polling station that he is designated to. Well, of course, we will be very cautious in the expansion of such a pilot scheme. Whereas, on the other hand, the civil servants is not the ultimate and the last group that we will have advanced polling. This pilot scheme is a means of obtaining experience and to consider whether we can expand it in future. Now, if you say that this advanced polling scheme is only targeted to the civil servants voting. Well, this can be discussed, not necessarily supported, but the secretary says that this pilot scheme would take into consideration expansion to other groups. Then I'm doubtful. I would like to ask you, who are the groups that would be included in the pilot scheme or that you have in mind for future advanced polling? So what are the targeted groups you have in mind for future advanced polling? Now, for the experience that we have obtained, there are people for different reasons are not able to vote on the main polling day. Whether we can have advanced polling for him to exercise his or her rights. So there are suggestions. For instance, he or she is not in Hong Kong, or whether due to other circumstances cannot vote on that day. Well, this pilot scheme will give us experience, and if you need to expand, of course, you have clear criteria for eligible electors. Well, for different reasons, it's very vague, unacceptable to us. For instance, eligible Mrs. Yong Hoi-yen, well, she could not come back to vote. Well, for the eligible election, we were not able to allow her to vote away from eligible. Well, this is a disguised. This pilot scheme is a disguised attempt for polling in the mainland, because they can claim that they are not in Hong Kong, they are involved in business or going to the national political conference. Well, how can we accept that? Because you cannot convince the Hong Kong people that they have another voting day to exercise their right and duty. Well, if I have to go to the hospital, or if I have a travel plan, would that be justifiable? Well, if you are on duty for polling, then it is justifiable. But for other reasons, whether that is justifiable is doubtful. Well, you have mentioned circumstances that cannot be accepted. There are circumstances that can be accepted. That is why we have a pilot scheme, so that when we, technically speaking and risk-wise, whether the pilot scheme proved to be successful. And we start with the civil servants, and with experience and with evidence, then we can discuss whether this advanced polling can be expanded in the future. Mr. Jimmy Ng, for civil servants working in the polling station, is a pilot scheme that I could support. Well, you mentioned Australia and Canada, and also there are countries that have voting online. Have you already gathered together the justifications for online voting? Well, what are the measures taken by other countries to ensure that ballot papers are not lost, what or tampered with, or exchanged? Have you garnered such experience? Mr. Ng has mentioned several issues which has been discussed in the report after each electoral cycle. Well, for electronic voting, if you are doing it online, this also involves a matter of confidence. Would people worry that electronic voting or electronic polling, whether they would go into the clouds or disappear. It is also a matter of confidence. So it is a matter of implementation, whether it can be carried out with risks under control. Well, for other countries or places, they have different backgrounds. Even if for electronic counting, other countries have experimented with them. No place can say that there is absolutely no problem. For instance, in the United States, you have seen that there are this or that problems that came about. So we are confident, but we are also prudent so that we can take small steps. And it is by this spirit that we have proposed this advanced polling in response to the report. Well, in international community, advanced polling a day ahead or several days ahead is not something new. Yes, that is right. Mrs. Alice Mack, well, the bottom line is a lack of confidence whether tricks will be played in advanced polling. Well, this is really this is really not a matter of concern. But the thing is that you have lost your computers. Well, if you have advanced polling, you and your team have to demonstrate to us that work will be done properly, that there will be no lost property or ballot boxes or computers. So, well, if you facilitate voting, the return will be high, because very often if the return rate is high, then it is not really to the benefit of the establishment parties. Well, this is not our concern. What our concern is to facilitate voting for the electors, because we have always heard that people have regrets because they cannot vote on that day. So I hope that advanced polling can be carried out properly to have experience for facilitation of voting. Well, the target for this pilot scheme, the group is the civil servants in the polling stations. Are you telling us that for the advanced polling, those who serve the advanced polling will not be the same team that served the main voting day? Well, we need over 20,000 civil service to serve the polling stations. Because we have 600 polling stations. So because voter turnout is getting higher and higher, the civil servants have problems even going out for meal breaks. Well, if we have this pilot scheme, we are having 1 or 2 advanced polling stations in the 18 districts, which means that it's about 20 or 30 stations. So we don't need 10,000 civil servants manning those polling stations. So advanced polling stations would have a lighter workload than the main polling day. And we are confident that those who are working on the main voting day would be able to take part in the advanced polling. Well, in our exchanges with civil servants, they complain that very often we have to take part in the EAC work, and about 30,000 civil servants involved in the polling. And this is a great proportion with respect to the total of civil servants.
I would support the government taking various measures to facilitate voting by all electors, civil service or not. I understand this is going to be a pilot scheme, and it would be something for polling staff in the form of advanced polling. This has my support. But it has been said that maybe for fire officers, they work long shifts. Maybe you should also allow them to take part. What about the doctors working in HA hospitals? They work long hours. Can you also allow them to take part in the future? And there are other people who will be engaged in some official duties, who may also want to make use of this arrangement. So please consider doing this for them in the future. I don't agree with some suggestion from members that the polling staff be allowed some time to cast their vote. I understand some of them do not work in his or her constituency, and so it may take a lot of time to travel back to the constituency to which he or she belongs. Well, there are concerns about security because we have a case of the loss of computers. And if we can have the advance polling as suggested by some members, just 1 or 2 days in advance, that will reduce the risk. And then maybe people can make a decision just a few days before actual polling. Why can't we reduce the time allowed? The May polling day is on a Sunday, so advance polling will have to take place on a Saturday. Even for a polling day, which is a Sunday, the preparation has to be done on a Saturday. So if we do this on Saturday, it means that the polling staff will have to start the preparation on a Friday. And for many schools, this is not going to be feasible. So the earliest possible day for advanced polling is the Sunday before the actual polling day. So it has to be 7 days. As I've said, that we are already doing as much as we can to release the polling staff carrying out duties on polling day to vote during their lunch hour. But sometimes it's not possible because they may have to attend to urgent duties on polling day, and they may not be able to leave for another polling station. Mr. Ma Feng-kuo, I think that we should try this out. This is a practice adopted by many jurisdictions. We can certainly learn from the experience. Has the government tried to understand these successful arrangements in other jurisdictions, including allowing the polling to take place outside these countries? It seems that 7 days, allowing 7 days in advance, is quite a long period of time. But we have to weigh this against the right to vote of these polling staff. So if we're to the polling stations for them, it will be 3,000 electors per station, and even though turnout is actual turnout is 2,000, you don't have to provide a lot of polling staff for advanced polling. Could you further compress the arrangement so that the advanced polling takes place during a shorter period of the day, and it can take place nearer the actual polling day? We have taken into account the actual implementation and the need to do some setting up. For the advanced polling, is 7 days is, in our view, the earliest possible period. As for the study, I defer to the Deputy Secretary. Yes, we have looked at the experience of overseas jurisdictions. Apart from the information in the paper, we look at 6 countries in particular: Australia, New Zealand, US, Canada, Japan, and Korea. And as regards the advanced polling day, and also the time allowed for that gap, well, in some United States, in some states in the U.S., it can be as early as more than a month. But this is a pilot scheme. We understand the need to be as close to the May polling day as possible, but we do not want to set a day which is really far off. And also, in terms of the polling hours for advanced polling, it's usually shorter in other jurisdictions. In some jurisdictions, for example, Australia, voting is compulsory, so have there are other arrangements. So there's some special arrangements for advanced polling. For some other jurisdictions, electors do not have to give reasons for advanced voting. For example, in Japan, electors can put forth various reasons for advanced polling, such as the need to attend a ceremony which they cannot decline. Mr. Martin Liu, if some electors are otherwise engaged or are not able to vote for some reasons, if these are polling staff which are given the chance to take part in the advanced polling and cannot do this, would they still be able to allow on the May polling day? Why do you want to store the ballot papers in several central locations? How can you arrange for the transport of the election materials to these advanced polling stations, and the ballot papers once it's completed? And what are you going to do to ensure security, such as CCTV surveillance and police involvement? And what more can be done to ensure security? It's also said by the government that the experience of the pilot scheme would advise us on whether the arrangement can be further extended. What kind of arrangement will be put in place to achieve these objectives? There are 4 questions. if someone is eligible to vote on an advance polling day and hasn't done so, then he or she can actually go to the original polling stations on the May polling day to vote. So that's allowed. Second, election materials not used on the advance polling day will be stored in a secure location. So that after the May polling date, all the polling materials will be centralized for counting. There will be full-scale surveillance and security oversight. So details can be further worked out, and further discussions can take place before finalizing those arrangements. As for other people who might want to avail themselves to this arrangement because they will be out of town, and whether after the review the arrangement can be extended to these people, well, that would happen after the pilot scheme is carried out and a review is also done. But the important thing is that we should launch the pilot scheme first. Ms. Starry Lee, the importance of the matter is about fair and open election. We have to make improvements along with the times. We are in a digital age, and the mobile phone is set to enter the 5G era. But it seems that our election arrangements are all first generation. And I have difficulties in explaining to visitors why we still have some polling staff crossing out the name of the elector who has just voted, who is going to vote. And also the counting is done manually. I understand that these procedures are very tightly managed so that people have confidence, full confidence. According to the Secretary, the advanced polling arrangement will be made available to civil servants, especially those who have to carry out polling duties on the polling day. We should take this first step because every year we receive complaints that they were too busy to vote. So we have to safeguard the right to vote of Hong Kong people. So why should we oppose to something that would allow polling staff to do this? But we have to be careful about the details. So, Secretary, what arrangement will be put in place to ensure that everyone understands this? And there are suggestions on whether we should make it closer to the May polling day. Why should it be 7 days before? And also, what about the security arrangements, the storage locations for the ballot papers, and so on and so forth? What more can be done to ensure public confidence? Secretary, when we review the experience we have gained in past elections, we certainly want to make improvements. We want to keep abreast with the developments, but we have to, at the same time, we have to make sure that the arrangements command public confidence, and we have to be very careful about making changes. So you can see that the proposal, the pilot scheme proposed, is very conservative. You may ask why it's only for civil servants. The same can be asked about electronic counting. Well, for this pilot scheme, we're talking about a small group of people, but they would allow us to gain some experience, and then we can chart the next step.
For details, we can come back to you and communicate them to you. Mr. Paul Chair, I am in full agreement with keeping of times. We criticize that we are before the polling. It is the time is too tight. After the polling, well, things have not been improved. So I think that it is good that we should go forward for electronic counting and electronic and advanced polling, apart from fair and open. But there is another principle. The principle, whether it be a right or an obligation, we should facilitate the voters' exercise of their rights. It shouldn't be restrictive. For many countries, they have a vast territory, and so they have advanced polling. For Australia and Japan, they have experiences that we can refer to. The Secretary suggests that we can go forward with this rather conservative pilot scheme. Well, for members of LegCo or their assistants that also take part in the polling stations, well, what to do with them? Even myself, I would have difficulty polling on that day. Well, so are there two different groups taking care of advanced polling and main polling? So would you consider that members of LegCo or their assistants with the names given, could you allow them also to take part in advanced polling if their number is rather limited? So there are two teams taking care of the main polling day and the advanced polling day. Well, can you have the advanced polling on Saturday? Because once the polling station is set up on Saturday, so could they vote on that day? Well, at 5 o'clock on Saturday, you can open it for voting at 7 on the Saturday. So you have the same team taking care of advanced polling and at the main polling. You could have it in the same polling station with a day's difference. Well, you have a bad experience of the loss of computer. It is an accident. Well, we have never had ballot papers lost. For the suggestion of Mr. Chair, well, we have also taken into consideration of bringing closer together the advanced polling day and the main polling day. I have already given you an explanation. As for members of LegCo and their assistants, I understand your problem. Well, it is easier for us to identify the civil servants group working at the polling stations. Well, this group is rather clear. Whether that can be extended to other groups, that is precisely what we have in mind. There are two motions. One is by Mrs. Helena Wong, and the other one is by Mrs. Starry Lee, supported by Mr. Ma Fong Kok. I have read these motions. They are relevant to the item of the agenda. If there is no objection, we will deal with these two motions. Mrs. Helena Wong, can you read out your motion? I would require
咁我哋而家打鐘，好嘛？打鐘
咁近。
我哋夠人㗎啦。
I would require a division vote. So we have prepared for your division vote. You have to press the button, but unless there's a request, I won't sound the bell. The panel urges the government to ensure the exercise of voting rights of civil servants working on the polling day through administrative arrangements, and to put aside the pilot scheme for the advanced polling in the 2020 Legislative Council general election. And after a holistic review and study of the pros and cons of the advanced polling, resubmit the proposal to the panel. We start our voting. So you have to press your button among the 3 buttons available, whether you are for or against or you abstain. So we are now voting on the motion by Mrs. Helena Wong. The voting is closed. Please verify your vote. The vote is now, the results of the vote, 19 present, 6 for, 12 against. The second motion is by Mrs. Starry Lee, supported by Mr. Ma Fung Kwok. The panel supports the launching of a pilot scheme of advanced polling in the 2020 Legislative Council general election so as to facilitate the voting by the personnel working at the polling stations and on duty there. However, in order to ensure confidentiality and the risks of lost ballots, there should be arrangements made. To this end, the panel urges the administration to review relevant laws and regulations, whether they are clear and adequate to ensure a fair and just election, including relevant laws that would allow the prosecution of any attempts to manipulate the or direct the electors' voting preference, and to have security measures for the ballot boxes and ballot papers. So press the button. Please verify your vote before the announcement of revotes. The voting is closed. Vote count 15 for, 6 against, none abstain. So the motion is passed. So we have come to an end in the discussion of this item. We now come to the 4th item of the agenda, launching a pilot scheme of electronic counting in the 2020 Legislative Council general election. I would like to invite the officials to come into the meeting room. Please press the button if you wish to speak. We have the officials here. Mr. Roy Tang, PS, from the Constitutional and Mainland Affairs Bureau, the PAS, Mrs. Cherry Jiang, Mr. Wang Ximan, Chief Electoral Officer, and Mr. Raymond Wang Min Chu of the Principal Electoral Officer. I will invite Roy Tang to walk us through the paper. In June 2017, the panel discussed the ballot counting, whether there are any possibility of using electronic means. And a promise was made that there will be a feasibility study on the improvement of electronic of counting, and we have invited the Chief Information Officer to help us, and we have a report last Wednesday to present the study results. Through market research, we have found equipment that could do the electronic counting. One is just counting the papers. The other is equipment that can do both vote recognition and paper counting. We have found 4 machines that could be used. However, there are 2 kinds. There's one kind that is only counting the papers, and that does not really simplify our procedure, and we do not suggest that they be used. However, there are double usage machines that can both recognize the votes and count the papers. After testing, the identification accuracy is up to 99.8%. It looks to be a high percentage. However, it has not met with the government, the administration's requirement, because the requirement is 99.9%. A very slight 0. Decimal would be rather substantial. For instance, 2 million ballots, there would be a difference of 20,000 ballot paper. So that would not be in keeping with the open and fair election, and would not be acceptable to the community. So for the DC papers, they are required to fold the ballot paper before putting it in the ballot box. Because the ballot is folded, it has to be manually unfolded. And for machines, the jamming could be the result of the folding of the ballot paper. And in such a case, we do not have the confidence to assure that the machines can be used for electronic counting. We do not rule out that there might be machines in the future that can deal with folded papers, ballot papers. So we suggest that in 2020 general election, we have a pilot scheme with 3 traditional FC counting. And we will see if in the workflow, if there is future technology allows, we could launch electronic counting in the future. There are 5 members that would like to speak. So if you like to speak, please press the button. So we'll have 4 minutes each. Mr. Chen Chi-chun, Mrs. Helena Wong, Mr. O-Lok Hin, Mrs. Claudia Mo, Alvin Yan, and Mr. Holden Chow. Mr. Chen Chi-chun, when would you decide on the machine to be chosen? Well, the testing has not resulted in 99.9% of accuracy, and that could only be used for traditional FCs. For the Annex A, there are only 2 companies involved. One is the Zhongfor Information Company. According to the website of this company, it is a voting equipment and service provided for the party and the state of the PRC. So apart from these 2 companies, would you look for other companies? Election is a delicate matter that requires a lot of prudence. For countries, democratic countries, not our own, well, the equipment that they use, what are the criteria involved in choosing companies?
會同意
If the panel agrees, and if the AAC also agrees that a pilot scheme be launched, then the government we need to get the legislation passed within this year. Our electoral legislation is very strict. Without legislative amendments, we cannot introduce new counting machines. And then if this is done, we would then go for a tendering exercise. In the tender document, we only set out the specifications, the support for hardware and software, the performance indicators. Of course, we need to get the endorsement of the OGCIO, as well the electoral system of the contractor is not going to be specified in any of the tender documents. And we need at least 6 months from the time of the issuance of tender document to the completion and award of contract. So the 2 contractors mentioned in the annex will not get any priority. The tendering exercise is open to all. Is that correct? The understanding is correct. It's open to all contractors. Do you need to carry out another trial of the contractors' counting machines to make sure that the accuracy is up to 99 point something %? Of course, we need to set out the specifications, and we also need to carry out trials of the machine. So what kind of assessment will be carried out? What criteria will be adopted for the tender assessment? As I've said, we'll look at the accuracy, the technical compatibility, because after every election cycle, actually we have elections almost annually, and this is just a pilot scheme. Because of the technical considerations, it will be used on traditional FC elections. This is going to happen once every 4 years. We need to make sure that the software is compatible in the future, because otherwise we need to buy a new batch of machine every 4 years. The investment will be too large. Dr. Helena Wong, we have a electoral system which is more complicated than any other country. We have FCs for electoral, we have traditional FCs and super FC, and then we have the GC, direct elections. And then you say that the electoral registers are very big, and therefore you're going to go for a launch pilot covering only 3 FCs only, with at most 10,000 odd voters. There's no harm doing a pilot scheme, but can you ensure 100% accuracy? So far, the accuracy you have recorded is just 99% plus, but not 100%. So for these 3 traditional FC, the candidates might ask for a recount. In the case of a recount, do you do it manually, or do you use the same counting machine? Thank you, Chairman. If we use counting machines to count the ballot papers of traditional FCs, the accuracy rate can be 99.99%. But what we have not been able to accomplish for this kind of accuracy is the DC second FC. We've done a number of trials. The accuracy is quite good. For traditional FCs, if the panel agrees and the EAC goes for this, and we have the pilot scheme implemented, then under the existing legislation, candidates or his agents or counting supervisors have sufficient grounds, some reasonable grounds, they can ask for a recount. We propose that during the pilot scheme, in the case of recount, we can do it manually in the case of a recount. We want the Legislative Council and the public to have confidence in the accuracy of counting machines. What kind of grounds would be sufficient to ask for a recount? It's not specified specifically the grounds under which a recount can be asked. It's worded in the negative. It is stated as that the returning officer cannot ask for recount unless there are sufficient grounds. Well, in that case, you are asking a person to exercise a discretionary power and for which the criteria are not clear. Whereas the wording of the existing legislation, the amendments have not been passed by this council, and I'm not a returning officer. If I tell you that in 2020, a certain returning officer will suddenly accept requests for recount if certain grounds are advanced, that will not be right for me to say so. But if the agents or the candidates in that election are in a situation whereby the number of votes are so close, and usually in the past, a recount would be allowed. In the March by-election, there's a difference of 2,000 votes between the two candidates. If you ask me, the difference was not as big as in other elections, but the returning officer did allow a recount. So you will not set a number of on the difference of votes. Of course, the permanent secretary is not a returning officer. Returning officers would disqualify candidates. I know that for the subsector elections, you have used counting machines. Are you talking about the same two machines here? Why don't you use the machines used in the EC subsector elections? I'm grateful for this question because this allows me to explain the matter further. You are familiar with the ballot paper, right? This is the ballot paper for the DC second FC, and you have to fold this, and before you deposit it into the ballot box. But this is a subsector ballot paper. It's just a piece of paper. So for the EC subsector election, it was done. The counting was done by counting machines because it's easy. We are using the Synchronic SR 6500 hybrid for the EC subsector election. The accuracy is 99.9% if we are talking about this kind of ballot paper. But in our internal tests, we use this District Council second functional contingency ballot paper where there's a fold and the accuracy is not as high. Of course, there are different designs for different ballot papers. because there are people who would do things other than as indicated on the ballot paper. They may chop the stamp at different locations. So my question is about the costs of counting. Would the cost be very different from what we incur now? And in the tendering exercise, there will be other contractors interested in entering bids. So would that mean that the tests you have conducted are really futile? Well, the EAC's internal tests of these counting machines have been completed, and we need to report the results to this panel. As for the future expenditure, it depends on the number of machines used and also the scale of future elections. And we need to get the tenders coming back first before we know the likely cost. There are 28 FCs. Only 5 or 6 with more than 10,000 electors according to 2016 registers. Of course, the scale of the elections would determine the number of counting machines. But you are already using the counting machines for subsector elections. Would the cost be different? Well, I can provide the information later. Ms. Claudia Mo, I would have a question about counting machines. Not that we haven't done this. We have done this with some counting machines. It's that if the there are too many ballot papers, you may not be able to cope. You may have to buy a lot or rent a lot of counting machines. But if the number of ballot paper is small, then you might as well count them manually. So what's the significance of this pilot scheme? Are you trying to use this extensively for all elections? I didn't notice that you had used counting machines. Why do you have to make this pilot scheme so prominently launched? You do make a point about making all these known. You have invited members to witness the test, and it seems that you have set the scene for the counting machines to be provided by some state-owned enterprise in the mainland. Would you be concerned about the impact on our confidence, politically speaking? If having heard members' views and you have given the green light and the EAC agrees to go ahead, and before the tendering exercise is completed, there's no way to tell which contractor will win the contract. Ms. Mo is correct in saying that for the EC subsector election, we are already using counting machines, but we are talking about this kind of ballot paper with no emblem of and logo of political parties. It's a very simple ballot paper. For this kind of ballot paper, there will be no need to have further pilot schemes. We're already using counting machines. But for the FC ballot papers, there's a lot more a lot of information is contained, and that's why we need the pilot scheme. The ultimate objective of the pilot scheme is, of course, that within a short period of time, We can get the counting machines from contractors, which will be good for counting the ballot papers which have been folded and unfolded in these, such as the DC Second FC ballot papers. We need to do this before we can come back to say whether we would use counting machines in the future. Without a pilot scheme, people will have no idea how this is done, and then without legislative amendments, we will not be able to catch up with the technological developments.
多謝主席。
And that would be a waste of time. Mrs. Moore, in our visit, you have mentioned that the counting machine is rather big, size-wise. The feeding in and the putting out, you can see them. But within the machine itself, do you have transparent walls for the machine? Then you can see how the ballots are being dealt with within the machines, and that would add to transparency. Yes, we have taken that into consideration, and we are following up on that suggestion. Mr. Alvin Young, improving the efficiency of counting is something that should be the future. Well, we don't know about the exact machines. However, if there are papers, ballot papers that cannot be counted, technologically speaking, can you separate them? For instance, for the ballot papers that come out, they classify them for A candidate, B candidate, or blank paper. Do you have such a sorting out? Or would you ask the service provider to be able to sort out also those non-valid paper or blank paper or ballot paper with problems? For these two machines, technologically wise, they can identify them. If there are no marked choice, they would be put into one category. So we will deal with these ballot papers manually. If the preference or the choice is clear for the blank paper, we will put them into the right pile for this candidate. However, technologically speaking, there is one issue. Hong Kong very often does not have only two candidates. For instance, for the FC, you have 5 or 6 candidates. And for the machine, it is like the printing machine. They have to be able to sort them out, the 5 or 6 candidates. Well, for the demonstration that you saw, the machine is not that big. As for the sorter, there are only 2 sorting space. Ballot papers, and they have electronically recognized they can electronically recognize the valid papers. And then for the non-valid papers that you have to be dealt with manually. However, there are no machine now that can deal with 5 or 6 candidates. Well, even with time, you still cannot find such a machine. Yes, according to the market research, we have not seen as of now such machines that can deal with 5 or 6 candidates. I'm afraid that it is rather difficult for providers now. As for manual recounting, the threshold for manual recounting, what is the criteria by which you would have a recounting? For instance, the candidate has the right, under whatever circumstances, to ask for manual recounting after the electronic counting. In this authority resides with the presiding officer. Well, it is possible that he may accord recounting. However, setting a number would require an amendment to the rules and regulations. And it is also a problem because it is a complicated matter, setting a percentage for the threshold of recounting. However, if a candidate or its agent can provide a justifiable reason, I think the presiding officer will gladly take that into account. Mr. Hon Zhao, I'd like to know if there is a clear mechanism whereby candidates can request for a manual recounting. This is a question raised just now. So what is the objective criterion whereby you can ask for manual recounting? Have you referred to other experiences in other places or other regions or examples that we can take into account of? Well, when doubts are expressed for the counting, one should also take into account the possibility of manual recounting. Well, according to the rules and regulations as they stand now, there are no hard and fast numbers. I have been a presiding officer, and very often, and from what I can see, when ballots, the returns are very close together, recounts would be requested. And there are also cases where recounting is not warranted, but still there's a recounting. I can imagine such a case where the number of ballots are higher. The number of ballots is higher than the number of ballot paper distributed. So there are 2 or 3 times where if the ballot paper counted is higher, even by 1 to the number of ballot paper distributed, a recounting is warranted. For the pilot scheme of electronic counting, in 2016 LegCo election, there are lots of rumors whereby there are physical ballot papers are preset. Now, for the this is going to the pilot scheme is going to be applied to the FC, traditional FC. Can you explain to us? Well, in the visit, we could see jamming of the papers. Well, what are the security measures? For instance, the identification of ballot paper, the counting within the machine. Would there be possibility of the algorithms being tampered with within the machine? Which is to say that how can we ensure that the recounting, the counting can be assured to be secure and just? The procedure and the monitoring of counting, be it electronically or manually, it lies within the last matching of ballot papers. The sealing of unmarked ballot papers, and there are also a series of matching and security measures. Now, the REO, for the REO there will be independent consultant to ensure that the independent testing is in keeping with our requirements. And also we have an IT security company that will ensure the risks involved. And we also intend to have an independent auditor to monitor the whole procedure to ensure that improvements can be made. So apart from the REO, there will be 3 independent institutions that would certify the machine, that would take care of the whole procedure. Well, for the announcement of ballot papers, well, they don't need a very specialized technology or knowledge to read the ballot papers. However, for the counting machine, you need specialized knowledge. Well, you have mentioned independent consultants or measures. Well, these are more convincing. So, yes. Mr. Mock, Charles Mock, and then Mr. Low. Let me extend the meeting by 15 minutes. Electronic counting is a new thing for us. For the EAC, there are election committee subsectors, and there are lots of candidates. And they have used electronic counting, and they are filling in little squares, and the counting machine would be able to read it, and that has been implemented. Because if you are to do it manually, then it would take a long time. Well, the whole process manually is a difficult matter, and so electronic counting has always been done for the ECSS. So electronic counting, we should be able to be confident. As for applying chops, there are technical problems. I'd like to ask, for electronic counting, for this kind of ballot papers, those ballot papers who would not meet the requirements, would they be misread as valid, or would valid papers be rejected? Well, if they are rejected, we can read it manually. We all know that Q papers are very strict. They are read done by one by one, and explanations whether they will be accepted or rejected. However, for machine-read ballot papers, well, would valid papers be non-valid and non-valid papers be valid? How are you going to solve it? There are also issues raised. Since the procedure is rather long for counting, you have to match the numbers of ballots that from different polling stations, and then there are ballot papers mixed, and you have to sort them out, and this is time consuming. Now, are there any improvement measures that can be done? However, well, you have some electronic counting. However, the whole procedure is still long. As for the first concern, well, this is the main aim of the pilot scheme. We have tested different machines.
Last time when members visited and the test center, you know that some machines register a recognition accuracy of 99.8%, but sometimes the machine cannot recognize a folded ballot paper. So the ballot paper will be ejected. It will not be accepted. And if the ballot paper is flattened first, and the indication is done by a chop, then the accuracy will be very good, because if the chop is affixed in a location outside the circle, it will be rejected. But of course, the returning officer, the counting officer, can accept it after manual checking. Mr. Charles Mock, I don't know whether my questions have been asked and answered. If so, please forgive me for the repetition. I've talked to the bureaus about the use of this technology. My experience of witnessing the counting, that if this is done manually, you have three boxes for three candidates, and you can see the size of the pile of ballot papers for an indication of who's leading. But this time, well, you would just feed the ballot papers into the counting machine, and you get an answer. From a psychological point of view, the candidates and the election workers could not find out the number of votings being counted, because they do have an expectation. If you have a bigger pile, the outcome would not be the opposite. And now you just get the final result after the counting machine has done its job. So maybe some candidates would then ask for manual counting as a result of the lack of any advance warning. Are you going to allow for recount if the candidate asks for it? Or would you allow this only if the difference of vote is small? And if you allow a recount, irrespective of the grounds, then perhaps in the first or two rounds of election, you are going to spend more time than before. Is there any restriction on allowing a request for recount? You mentioned the accuracy rate of 99.8%. Is it an audited figure, or is it just the manufacturer's test result? If it's an audited accuracy rate of, say, 99.8%, we'll have more confidence than in the case of accuracy rate as claimed by the manufacturer or by you through the test. The first question has been asked and answered. When we decide on the use of certain counting machines, the EAC would also build in two safeguards. First of all, there will be the acceptance test. We will not just accept the accuracy rate as claimed by the manufacturer, and then there will be an auditor on the accuracy of the software, and then if in the case of FCs, there will be a third auditor. As for the accuracy rate in the paper of 99.8%, it's not been audited. It's the result we have obtained through the test by counting the more than 200,000 ballot papers At present, the returning officer, the legislation does not specify any specific level of difference of votes where the request for recount would be entertained. Actually, it's up to the returning officer. For example, if there are problematic, questionable ballot papers counted as valid, then a recount request will be allowed. We know that for traditional EC subsector election, if a request is asked, it can be counted through the counting machines. It will not be done manually. Otherwise, it's just not possible to do a recount. You mentioned three things. You talk about a second-tier review of the software. I don't know whether that can be translated into an accuracy rate. I was thinking about an auditor who can certify the accuracy level. That would give us more confidence. The on location supervision will not give us that kind of accuracy if the level can be certified beforehand. All right, number 5 on the agenda, AOB, nothing under AOB, so meeting's adjourned. Thank you all for attending the meeting.